In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to color match the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic 2 Zoom using a color checker and Davinci Resolve. Here we are now hovering above the white portion of the color checker. On the white card, first we get it within range of exposure, and then you hold it basically over the white portion. You look at the white balance. When you set it in incandescent and custom, you're getting 2800K. Sunny gives you 5500K, but if you set it to auto and then custom, you're seeing we're locking in 5300K. So set it to auto, let the drone calibrate to the color of the white card, and then lock it in with custom, and then hit the record button to capture a quick video, which we will then use in Davinci Resolve. We will use the vector scope to fine tune the white balance further. Now we will do the color checker side of the card. So just get it within view and record. Also just verify that your overexposure warning is enabled. Record it. Alright, here's the Mavic 2 Zoom set at 28mm in 4K. And we're aiming it above the color checker. The color checker is facing the sun. So we're using the white balance portion. Color is set to cine-like. Style is -2 sharpness. The other settings are left at 0. As you can see, we can set it to auto and then custom. See, incandescent at custom is 2800K, but if you set it to auto and hover it above that white balance portion, you'll get something like 5100 Kelvin in this particular situation. Hit the record button to get a quick recording so that you can fine tune the white balance even further in post. Now we're going to do the color checker. So I have my overexposure warning enabled so that the white portion at the very top, I believe it's like IRE 90 or IRE 100, doesn't really matter. Just make sure it's not overexposed, and then record the entire color chart. And that's all there is to it. And then you can fly. So here's the Mavic 2 Zoom at 28mm in cine-like profile. Now you see the Mavic 2 Pro in 10-bit D-Log-M. So while the colors look a little bit different than the Mavic 2 Zoom, we are going to use the color checker in Davinci Resolve to get these to match much more closely, and then we'll finish it off with some, by eye adjustments. Now we're set to 38mm on the Mavic 2 Zoom. Just doing another quick shot. Nothing special, not meant to have good composition because I had both drones in the air. Just trying to get some footage to show off dynamic range here. Alright, and here's the Mavic 2 Pro at the sensor crop mode, the HQ mode, so about 39mm. The camera has a little bit more dynamic range, but in post we're going to make that Mavic 2 Zoom match up quite nicely. So in Davinci Resolve 15, when I try to import my footage, I got the media offline error, and I uninstalled Resolve and then updated my video card drivers, as well as reinstalling my codec packs, and the issue didn't get fixed. So my workaround, it's a little bit odd, but I play the clip in Media Player Classic, and then I pause it where I like to, and I save an image, or I can choose the Alt-I hotkey, and I actually save it as a JPEG. So this is a 10-bit source video here, right, in H.265, and I'm actually saving it as an 8-bit JPEG. Keep in mind that I'm just using Resolve to get the colors correct, and then I'm going to export a LUT out of Resolve, and I'm going to import that into my video editing software, Vegas Pro 16. Alright, so I've got some timelines I've already created here in Davinci Resolve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up this timeline here with some Mavic 2 Zoom clips. But before I go any further, I would like to go into the File menu and go to the Project Settings, and we're going to make sure that our project is properly color managed, or at least color managed within reason. So the default is actually YRGB, and it's actually 2.4 for everything. So we're going to go ahead and switch this to 2.2 and color manage, make sure everything's the same. Now technically this is not really correct because you can actually be a bit more specific and set the exact color management you want to go for the input. So for example, you could say DJI D-Log, but you know what? I want to just import everything in and manually do it myself and sort of try to reverse engineer the log curve. It's not really what you're supposed to do, but I like doing it anyway, so this is just the way I like to work. color manage 2.2 gamma rec 709, and in your video editing software, in this case I'm using Vegas Pro 16, you can see that while I'm editing I'll use the 8-bit timeline, but once I start doing any sort of LUTs or color grading, I'm going to go to full range. I'm going to set my compositing gamma to 2.2, which is going to match my Davinci Resolve compositing gamma. And the view transform, it is by default at sRGB, but because this is not raw footage or anything, raw video, we are making sure it's going to be off so that there is no gamma corrected representation. We're just going to see the view transform. There's going to be no transform here on the view, no view LUT. Now another thing to take note of here is you should install Media Info. It is free. And you right click on your video clip, you open it up in Media Info, and you see here, I'm not quite sure, I don't see whether or not this is video levels or if it's full range, but when I don't see anything saying it's limited range, it will say limited somewhere around here. I don't see it saying limited, so I'm going to assume it's full range. So select all your clips, go to clip properties. By default it'll be at auto, so set your data levels to full and click OK. Alright, so now we're ready to go on over to the color tab. Now this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to use Davinci Resolve. There's plenty of videos like that out there, but I'm just going to highlight some of the features that I'm using to take advantage of what I can do with the color checker. So first I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt-S and create a new node. I'm going to rename it to white balance, and I'm going to create a power window here and move it on into the middle of the white portion. You can see the exposure there is it's everywhere, but when we see the exposure for the white portion, it's still within range. So let's go to the vector scope. You can see the white dot here. We're going to change our color temperature to sort of get that white dot to rest as much as we can in the center. So that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and turn off our power window and look at before and after. So we are a little bit more closer to a proper white balance. For now, we're going to go ahead and apply this grade onto the color checker portion now. So we've already done the white balance. We're going to hit Alt-S, and this one's going to be for colors. So before we go into this, I just want to mention that you can see we're in uncontrolled situations here. So for example, some of the grass is creating shadows on this color checker, and you can see that this patch right here is supposed to be black, but it's reflecting the sky a little bit. So this is supposed to be useful for helping with your contrast overall, especially these patches on the bottom. It's supposed to be useful for setting your contrast, but this patch is supposed to be black, but it's not, because again, it's reflecting the sky. It's a glossy patch. So basically, we're not gonna really be using these black patches. We're mainly just using these 6 colors up here, which are gonna match on our vector scope, and then we're gonna cross-reference with the skin tones here. And then we're going to do the contrast by eye. And that's what works for me. So there's going to be about 70% of the procedure is basically where you're trying to match the video signals. And then another 30% is you're just doing it by eye. And I found that trying to match it perfectly by just using the color checker like a robot, that's not the way to go. You want to use the color checker, get what you can out of it, and then do a little bit of extra work, because remember, this is an uncontrolled situation. If you're in a studio environment, you can be a bit more scientific, but we're not. We're outside, and so we are going to go ahead and do this a different way. So I'm going to go into the hue versus hue, but before I do that, and this is not absolutely required, but I'm going to create another power window. And you can see on the vector scope, let me go and make that bigger. Let me make it big. So if I go to my hue versus hue, what you can do is you can maybe increase the saturation to 75, for example. And now we're going to go ahead and move our hues over here. We're trying to match them. So yellow, green, cyan, blue. Now, I've noticed the blue on the color checker is a bit purple. So basically, I will go ahead and match it there, but if I don't like it, I will change that blue, because it will affect the colors of the sky. Now let's do red real quick. And you can see the skin tones, the skin tone line here. It's still reasonably okay. Alright, so now let's go over here to hue versus saturation. And let's get the saturation sorted out. We're going to get these falling in line in their boxes. Does not have to be perfect. Get magenta in there. I'm going to take red and bring red down a little bit. And basically, now, when we get rid of this and then go over here, and then we turn off our power window, you can see if I go to the beginning, this is how the cine-like footage looked. And then we use the white balance portion of the car to correct it. Didn't make a whole lot of difference, but it definitely did. It's quite subtle here. And then we use the color checker to fix our colors. So let's go ahead and apply it to this shot right here. It's a little bit too saturated, and that's okay. We're gonna go and bring the saturation down to 50. We did use the saturation increase to get our saturation within the boxes, but then you can tone it back down to 50 if you want. So let's go and try that again. Apply the grade. This is okay. You could say it's not saturated enough, but that's all right because we can go into our video editing software and bump up the saturation later. So let's go and apply the grade here as well. And now I'm just going to apply the grade to the rest of these shots. So you can see before and after, before and after. Here again, before using the color checker, maybe these reds might have been a bit too hot. And then you apply it. This seemed to match the scene that I saw in real life just a little bit better. But because our white balance was so correct when we shot this, by using the color checker, by locking in the white balance with the custom setting, the color checker isn't making a huge difference here. So if you're just using a single camera, using a color checker isn't that important. But the moment you start doing multi-camera shoots, so you're using various types of cameras, then color checkers can be very useful to help color match your footage. We are done with the Mavic 2 Zoom at the moment. Let's go and go into the Edit tab and go into the Mavic 2 Pro. I've already done some grading here, I believe. Actually, let me go ahead and load up that timeline. Yes, I've already done some grading. So I'm going to go to Reset All Grades and Nodes. Alright, so this is the Mavic 2 Pro. So let's go ahead and do the same procedure. We're going to go and create first we're going to create a node here. So you can say add node, add serial, or Alt-S. We're going to rename this to white balance. Going to we'll create a power window. Doesn't really matter what kind you create. But I prefer isolating a portion of the chart. Now I'm going to really isolate that. Go into the temperature slider. Okay. Mess with our temperature intent. Get rid of the power window. Here is before and after. Now I'm going to apply this grade to our color match portion, the color card portion of the color checker. Alt-S to create a new node. This is going to be named colors. We'll go ahead and create another power window around this, because this is really all I'm using of the color checker. I'm going to isolate that, get rid of the clips. And then we will, normally I don't bring up this, but I'm going to do it now because of this video. It will definitely be easier for you to see. So we will go ahead and we're going to up our saturation maybe to 75. Now you can see I'm doing something a bit incorrect here. I'm not actually converting the D-Log footage into like Rec 709 because I'm using the color checker to sort of cheat a little bit. And then I'm just going to grade the rest by eye, and that works for me. That's what I like doing, basically doing it simply. I'm not bothering to use LUTs. I do not use LUTs, at least for these particular cameras, I'm sure, because sometimes I just don't like the way the LUTs appear, the way they manipulate your footage. I like to know exactly what's going on, so I'm just not using LUTs. So we're going to go ahead and move that yellow, make sure it's looking good. The green, move it down. Rotate the cyan. Rotate the blue. Same thing with the blue. I do not like the way the blue on the color checker looks. It tends to make the skies look a bit purple. If I don't like the color, I'm going to shift the hue, rotate the hue myself, and then I will account for that by eye with the other drones. So it's not really, the color checker is excellent, but don't treat it like an end-all be-all sort of robotic way to match your cameras. You can do that if you're in a studio environment, but if you're out here in the real world, you use the color checker to help assist you get most of the way there, and then you do the rest by eye. Again, the skin tones are still lining up pretty well along that line. So let's go ahead and turn off. Bring the saturation, oh actually we'll just double click on this to bring it back down to 50. And now we will bring back our clips. And let's apply the grade to this shot. And let's also do the same here to the rest. Apply the grade. Alright, so we've used the color checker to get some clips from the Mavic 2 Zoom and the Mavic 2 Pro much more closer to each other, but they're not quite there yet. If I go into the color tab, I've saved some stills here. You can see that they don't quite match. So first, you'll notice that this one's a little bit more blue, a little bit more purple over there in the whites. And you can see this is a little bit more green. And you also notice the most obvious difference here is the sky. The color of the sky is quite a lot different. I do recommend you having a color calibrated monitor. Now this monitor I'm using right here is on the Dell M6800 laptop, which is over 4 years old. And it's most likely a 7-bit display with a 1-bit passive dither. So it's not high-end or anything. But I use the, there's a little color calibrator device, and you put it on your monitor, and basically it gets the colors, it gets the best out of that monitor. It basically creates a LUT for your monitor. So even though this monitor is not high-end, I'm able to notice the color shifts a little bit better because I've calibrated my monitor. So I just created a new node, and I'm just going to go ahead and use the qualifier. I'm going to go, actually instead of doing that, I'm going to go over to the hue versus hue. I'm just going to click in here and rotate that hue until it's a little bit closer. And now if we go back to our image wipe, it is much closer. Alright, once you've finished using the color checker as well as the tools available here in Davinci Resolve, such as the hue versus hue and the hue versus sat, to get your colors a little bit more closer, you can see that the Mavic 2 Zoom is right here, and if I go over to the Mavic 2 Pro, the colors look much closer to each other, especially the sky. You can see the sky looks good. So what you want to do is right click the clip that you did your color grading on and choose Generate 3D LUT. We'll go to the desktop, and I'm going to name this M2P LUT 01. Now I'm going to go to my Mavic 2 Zoom, right click the clip, Generate 3D LUT, and I'm going to name this one M2Z LUT 01. So now I'm in Vegas Pro, the video editor I use. So first I'm going to go to the project properties and make sure the pixel format is set to 32-bit floating point full range. Composite and gamma will be 2.2, the same as we had in Davinci Resolve, and no view transform, so no view LUT. And now I'm going to add a LUT filter to my Mavic 2 Pro footage. I'm going to set the interpolation to tetrahedral and choose my Mavic 2 Pro LUT. And now I'm going to also copy this LUT over here. And there we go. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing as well for the Mavic 2 Zoom footage. So Mavic 2 Zoom, you can set the interpolation afterwards, of course. And if I was to solo this track, you can see that's how that looks. And let's go and make sure we copy this one and then paste it over here. So now if I basically switch between these two or mute the Mavic 2 Pro track, you can see that the colors are very similar, and the same thing is over here as well. The colors are very similar, especially the sky, which is most obvious. Alright, so here in Vegas I did a few tweaks. I went into the color curves and added some contrast, and then It's a minor, I didn't do any color correction here. Added a vignette, and all these little color corrections would be before the LUT. And then over here, on the Mavic 2 zoom, so if we look at that footage, you can see I did a little bit of minor color tweaking just to get things a little bit, finishing it off. So here is the final result. Mavic 2 Pro and Mavic 2 zoom. It's not a perfect color match, but it is good enough to where if you were to intercut between these two shots, no one will really know that it was taken with two different drone cameras. Same thing over here. We've got the Mavic 2 Pro and now the Mavic 2 zoom. Again, they look very similar. Okay, something I want to mention as well is that while this tutorial is based on color matching, it is important to mention that on the Mavic 2 zoom you can see that the horizon line is level here, but on the Mavic 2 Pro you can see it's a little bit more like an action camera, in that even though it's 28mm here, there's a little bit of a curve, and that's because in order for the Mavic 2 Pro to shoot 10-bit color using the D-Log-M profile, all the processing power of the drone is being used, and there's nothing left to encode this video signal with a warp applied, some sort of warping effect that would be able to correct for this lens distortion. So it's not really a big deal, it's just something to be aware of. And so if you want to correct this, in this case I'm using Vegas, and I simply add a deform effect, and I add it before the crop, and I add an amount of 0.3, and it's still not absolutely level, but it is definitely much better than before. So just, it's something to be aware of. Now on the 38mm shot here, it's about 39mm really, you see here's the Mavic 2 zoom, here's the Mavic 2 Pro. I did not need to add the deform effect here because this is the sensor crop mode, where basically you're zooming in onto the 20 megapixel sensor to get an 8.29 megapixel 4K video, so the lens distortion would be far less apparent here. But this is completely acceptable to me, so I just thought I'd mention that as well. So hopefully this video helped you with understanding a little bit more of how to use a color checker in Davinci Resolve to at least use the 6 color chips at the top with the vector scope and the hue versus hue and hue versus sat curves, and then also exporting the LUT into your video editing software and doing some final contrast tweaks in there. You're really supposed to do the contrast in Davinci Resolve using the color checker, but because this is an uncontrolled situation, I wanted to show how even though the color checker wasn't used exactly as appropriately as it should be, you can still do the rest of the color correction in your video editing software and everything should work out good. So hopefully this helped you match colors on your cameras a little bit better, and thanks for watching.